I'm Lubo, and this is my first video where I'm recording myself, so don't be harsh when you watch this. This video will be related to PHP. We will talk about MVC, which is actually model view controller. I know that this is a bit of an old way to structure data, but still, in my eyes, this is something that it's as a basis, and everyone should have an idea how this works and why it's built that way. So we will focus ourselves only on the basis now. So we will have a PHP project where there will be a user. The user will fetch some data. The controller will manipulate the module. The module will update the view, and the user will see the end result. This is the most important thing that one should remember. View is responsible for how the user will see the output. View is really useful because it could be either HTML, it could be API endpoint or something else. It doesn't matter. The point is that if someone has to do some magic or work on the views, they could do it separately. Then the module should be abstract enough, which means that it doesn't matter what kind of database you're planning to use or something else, it should still work again. And the controller, based on its name, is the one responsible for how data is going to be processed and where this data will go and come from actually. So currently we do have our setup. In our setup, we have XAMPP installed on Windows. We are currently having only one simple PHP file. We have a virtual host. This virtual host is listening to a folder which is called exercises. In our case, there's only one PHP file in there, and we are planning to test a simple project. The project that we'll test is called actually MVC sample. There is a repository for it. It's github.com, then slash this name, and then MVC sample. I will provide the link in the video, so it's ready for you to use it. So without any further ado, let's just start and test it. So first I will copy the address. So I click copy, then I go to my folder where I am going to clone the project. I click right button, and I have git bash or git GUI option here. So I'm going to use the git bash option. And if I type git clone, and if I try to use Control Shift and V, and then I see that this doesn't work here, and I click paste, I will get an error like this, like HTTPS protocol is not supported. I'm showing this on purpose because many of the students usually do this, so don't stress about it. This is expected. Usually this means that you have clicked either Control V or something else, and it's adding an extra symbol. So if you simply try again and type git clone and only click paste, but get the correct URL. So I'm getting the correct URL, going back in the console, clearing the errors. And if I click paste, then you could see that it's cloning the repository into the desired folder. I have already cloned the repository in the desired folder, and I should start checking what is the structure of that repository. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, but you could use any editor based on your preference. I'm using this because it's free and it's really easy. For PHP, it could be really useful depending on what kind of extensions you're going to set. Currently, I haven't set any extensions, so this is the basic one. So you could see the structure of the folders that we have here. It's the same structure that you could see in your File Explorer. And what do we have? We have the controller folder, which is, if I go back to the diagram, we have the controllers. Then we have view, which is actually responsible for what the end user will see. So we have the view folder, and last but not least, we have the model folder in here. How this could be analyzed? Well, simply, the thing that we are going to run now consists of user. We are the user accessing the website through the browser, which means that now if I type MVC sample, I should see something happening on the screen. So you could see I get a message, hello there, Jon Snow, and you have successfully landed on the home page. And if I go to posts, I see a message that this is a fortune cookie. And if I click draw cookie, actually I get a random fortune cookie. This project is utilizing a fortune cookie API, and every time when you refresh the page, you get a new fortune cookie based on the API response. The idea of this exercise is to show the students how MVC works, some simple, extremely simple PHP logic, and show you how you could render data here. So what is happening when I land on the page? What is happening is first, I'm hitting the index.php file. Then if I open index.php file here, you see that index.php file is only 10 rows or less. And what we are doing here is we are checking, do we have anything passed as get? And then we are assigning the values to the controller variable and then to the action variable. If nothing is added here in the URL, how do I know if something is added? Well, obviously here we don't have any parameters, but if I go to a different page, you see that we have some parameters. We say the value for controller will be posts and the value for action will be index. So this index.php file is actually responsible for setting the correct value. And if no values are passed as get parameters, it will automatically assign default ones, which are pages and home. The next thing that this file does is it says, please load the layout file. And if I go to view folder and open the layout PHP, you could see that we have the HTML added here. I know that this is .php extension, but nevertheless, it allows you to have the two descriptive languages mixed. And you see that inside here, we have another require once, which says, please load the roots PHP. So if I go back to my diagram, you see that we have the user loading and fetching index.php, index.php loading layout PHP, and layout PHP saying, hey, roots PHP, could you come and participate in this game? So if I check roots PHP file, which is here, I see that there is one method called call, and also we have an array of controllers, and that array has key pages, and then there is a subarray with two extra values, which are home and error, and then we have two extra ones, which is key posts and subarray of index and show. Why do we have this? Well, if you check the logic here, what it does is it will try to check whether the controller variable, which was set in index.php here, is one of the keys of the controller's array. Why do we do this? Well, if this is part of it, it will continue. Otherwise, it will throw an error, but it won't throw an error. It will render the error page for us. How could we test this? If I go one step back, you see that here we're passing the controller value as a get variable. And if I type something which is not a valid item from this array, I see the error page rendered. And how I am sure that this is the error page of the project and not something else? Well, if I go to the view, go to pages, you see that there is error PHP, and this is the markup. And I could even add something like this to make sure that we are checking the correct file. So I have added an error, and if I refresh the page, you see I have added and edited the correct file. So roots PHP in this case is responsible for making sure that any value passed here as controller is a valid one. Then another thing that it does is, if we go one step back, it checks whether the action variable, which is again assigned by the index.php, is part of these subarrays. It has the same purpose as before. If you are editing something here, it will go and check, do we have a valid action? If we don't have a valid action for this one, then it will automatically go and render some error page for you. This is extremely important for you to remember. Anytime when you have some get parameters passed in the URL, you should always make sure that the values coming from those get parameters are valid. Also, it's extremely important to know that this is a security threat if you're not validating the input coming from the get parameters, especially when it comes to a case where you go and make some requests to the database. So that's why in here we have added extremely simple configuration, which lives under roots PHP. This configuration includes an array, which is associative array, which has keys and then subarrays. The idea is that this is the name of the controller. These are the actions assigned to that controller. If you check any other MVC PHP-based framework, they have something similar. In here, we're using just plain PHP, but when we start using Laravel, you will see that in there, we also have to declare and say, hey guys, this is the controller. These are the actions that will be used. So we have the configuration. We have a simple validation whether we are following and trying to load something. That is a load by the configuration. If I check this method call, how does it work? Well, if you see, this method receives two parameters. It receives controller and then action. What it does is it will try to load a file based on the name of the controller. So this means that in here, when you have pages, there should be pages underscore controller. When you have posts, there is posts underscore controller. And how could we be sure that this will work? Well, we're actually validating it first before making the call. So we know for sure that if this configuration is correct and if you have been careful and created the correct pages and controllers, then this file should exist. The next thing that we are doing is based on the controller, we are checking which case is this. Is it pages? If it's pages, we are making a new instance of the pages controller. If it's posts, we are requiring a model from the model folder, and again, making a new instance for the post controller. I will open the pages controller so you could see what is the structure. As you could see, this is a simple PHP class. It has its name, and then there are two methods. There is public function home and public function error. Both of those functions, what they do is, in home, we assign two variables, which are first name and last name, and then we are saying, hey, please load this view. And this view is view pages home PHP. If I open view pages home PHP, I could see that in here we have hello there, first name and last name. So if I go one step back, this means I'm trying to load pages home. So I'm checking pages controller, home action. Home action has Jon Snow, and it's loading view pages home. We're trying to follow the same naming convention across the controllers, across the views, because this is keeping the structure really simple. So if I go one step back, you see here, hello there, Jon Snow. And this means that you could easily edit everything because you could, let's say, add a comma. And if I refresh the page, I expect the comma to be seen here. This is how Jon Snow is passed from the controller to the view. And this is what we have in the diagram here. We are landing in index PHP. Index PHP is assigning correctly the controller and the action values. Then layout PHP is rendering for us the basic layout. Then roots PHP is validating, are we trying to load something which is valid? Are we trying to fetch valid posts and action? And then we are executing the controller and the action. And based on the execution, we are fetching data from module and rendering the view. And this is how it populates the layout PHP. We always have the menu, but under the menu, we have a dynamically rendered content based on the controller and based on the action. So if I go one step back, we have pages controller, we have home action, and we have first name and last name. This first name and last name, if I search for these variables in the view, you will see that they are exactly the same. And yes, this is working because they are assigned globally here, and every other file which is loaded sees them. Well, when you come to using different frameworks, Each framework has its own rendering engine, and this rendering engine usually has a way for you to provide data to the view. In here, we are not using something like that. We are trying to follow as simple as possible structure. But what you need to remember is, first, you need to have a good configuration. Then you need to validate, are you following the configuration? You need to have a general error page. You need to have a way to provide data to the view. And your view should be separated from all the other logic. This view here, including the home page, its main purpose is to know that it will receive first and last name, and it should display that data. This view doesn't care what happens behind the curtain. This view doesn't care where this data is coming from. The purpose of this view is only to show the basic screen. So if I check the error page, its only purpose is to load view pages error PHP, which is actually the general error page. As you could see, this is extremely simple example, allowing you to have some navigation, allowing you to have some validation. So if I add an invalid action again, I see the error. And if I check, in this case, post controller index action, what happens behind the curtain? So post controller index action says, hey, please load all the posts from this module. Let's see, do we have something in there? Well, we have a title, welcome to Fortran cookie, extremely interesting sample. And then if I open the view, which is under view posts index, so view, I will open posts index, I see that we have a Fortran cookie here. And then we have a button saying draw cookie. And this button goes to where? It goes to post controller action show. We don't need this ID action. It's only post controller action show. And if I refresh the page and I go here, you see what is where we are leading. We're going to post controller action show. And if I click on it, I get a sample random Fortran cookie. And how does it work? How, when I click and go to post controller action show, I get that random cookie. I need to go one step back and check what is happening inside the show action. Inside the show action, you could see that we are running just post find and then returning the data. How do we know and why do we run post find? Well, this is old code showing you just a sample way how you should think when it comes to having and communicating with a database. Usually, if you have an index method, you usually list something. Usually, if you have a show method or find method or edit method, you usually have to work with only one ID. In this first exercise, we will always refer to posts module and we will always refer to some methods, but you could see that those methods are first static, which allows us to call them without having to initiate the module. And also, in those methods, we are not receiving any parameters. We are simply returning some of them. So I won't focus on the all method. I will go into find method in this case. And we are using CURL or curl for this. And if you open this URL here, let's open it in your browser. You will see that every time when I hit refresh, I get a new Fortran cookie. Luckily, this is a free API that we could use, and I'm using this free API in order to show the students how to make requests. So the next thing that we haven't covered at all is what does it curl stands for. So if I open curl here, and if I type php.net, so this means I'm trying to open the official documentation of PHP. So php.net is your first friend. php.net has a lot of examples and it has a lot of really good use cases. And another way where you could check is I'm going to strictly to curl examples, and you see we are trying to read the output of a certain website, and we're returning the result as response value. We are saying, hey, please return the result, exec the result, and don't forget to close it. So we are initting, setting options, and closing. And this response here is actually the response that my browser is receiving. If I click inspect, and if I go to network, and again, if I refresh, you see here that the response is actually JSON. I know that this is JSON. And based on the API documentation, I know that this is JSON. So this response here is actually returning JSON. That's why I'm using JSON decode function, which is available in PHP. And it decodes the string, and it decodes the string as an associative array. Why I'm using this JSON decode and then true? So I'm using it in a way because if I open post show PHP, you will see that we're printing the post and then fortune. And if I remove from the module, so I'm going to model post, and if I remove this here and try to fetch a random fortune cookie, you see we have an error because it's trying to use object type of std class as an array. That's why I'm having this true, so I could access it directly as an array item. Otherwise, this response is not an array. So I'm again breaking it on purpose, going in the browser. And if I click refresh, you see there's a fatal error. And it says that this error is inside my MVC sample view posts show PHP on line 7. So if I go again to view posts show, and if I check line 7 here, I will try to print the content. I will use this tag, and I will use this as a response. So it should be like this. And if I click refresh, you see we have an object std class, and then we have a fortune as a value, which means that I either have to do it as an array, or I have to try to access this in a different way, because otherwise it's not following the same structure. So why it's working now? Because this is an std class. So as an object, I have attributes of the object. And in PHP, if I have to access an object and its attribute, let's compare. If I have a class and I try to read any variable in that class, I have to use this syntax. But I don't want to use this syntax. I want to use the array syntax. So if I want to go one step back and use the array syntax, I need to add true to JSON decode. And if I click refresh, then we will have an error because I'm trying to read the property fortune of an array, because this means that this post here is no longer a class, it's an array. And if this is an array, I could directly access the value of the array and simply load the fortune. So it works. This exercise will be a short one. The idea of this video recording is just to stress on what are the main points that you need to focus, which are: you need to check what does MVC stands for. You need to remember that we have a clear separation between controller, module, and view. You need to have a way to understand that we have this same separation inside the folder. So we have controllers, we have model, and we have view. You need to keep in your mind that there's a way how this is structured. So the user opens index.php. Index.php will go and read whether you have passed controller and action. Based on that, it will call the layout. The layout will load the HTML for you. And then once the HTML is loaded, the layout will go and load routes.php. Routes.php will validate whether you have valid values for controller and action. And if you have invalid ones, it will show an error for you like this. And if you have valid ones, valid values, then it will go and initiate the controller, and it will call the correct method of that controller. How it's calling the correct method? Well, it's with this syntax here. We are saying controller, and then please execute the method. And those methods or actions in this case are public functions from the controller classes. In those public functions, usually we get the data and pass it to the view, or we call any models and then again render the view. Last but not least, one of my favorite things that I like to say in this example is you see in here that we are always checking if these variables are there, and if they are not there, we are assigning a valid values. So a way to make your PHP code to run faster is simply assign the default value and only change it if you need it. This is valid not only for the PHP language, it's valid for other languages. So always try to think, are we making any extra calls? Are we making any extra checks? And cutting and reducing those here, it might be something simple, but as this is the main index PHP file, if you run an execution tree, you'll see that it will generate a lot of branches. So please always think how you could optimize your work and how you could make it easier to read. So this is the simple Fortran cookie system. You find the address of the repository where you could download the code, and please check the video and leave any comments if you have any questions. Thank you and see you next time.